I'd like to introduce Marianne Brudwick. Sorry, Marianne.
That's okay.
Um, I've known Marianne for a very long time. And I asked her to speak today. She's going to share her and her family's story, but she's also going to share some other insights, which, you know, is interesting. And I can talk about that after she speaks. Marianne married Rod Brudwick, the athletic and energetic boy next door. Oh, lucky you. At 18 years old, and found herself a caregiver to him 28 years later when he suddenly was diagnosed with glioblastoma at the age of 47. Through that year-long journey and following his death in 2010, she learned how to press on, determined to keep her family together and her faith intact. Marianne is mom to three amazing growing children and has one precious grandson. Since 2011, she formed the Bellingham, Washington Brain Tumor Support Group and continues to facilitate this monthly meeting. She has a heart for those walking through the same arduous journey of brain cancer. She is currently employed as the HR manager at All American Marine in Bellingham. Marianne, welcome.
Thank you so much, Diane. I hope you can hear me, and thank you for putting my slides up. I'm just going to mention a few things. You know, I could go deeper in some things, but you can reach out to me later if you want some more information. Like she said, I'm the facilitator of the Bellingham, Washington Brain Tumor Support Group. And it began in 2011. And I first met Diane, like she said, in 2010 when I attended a caregiver support group meeting at Swedish Hospital that she initiated. I was so grateful for that because I immediately felt the benefit of being with others there, like we're doing today, and we share a difficult journey. So Diane encouraged us that were there. There's probably about 8 to 10 of us. She answered our questions the best that she could. That one meeting inspired me to start our local support group later on. And for those who have been through our local group and lost their loved ones, we also have a group, a secondary group that's called the Glee Club, and there's no singing involved. If you can imagine, Glee is short for glioblastoma. So the purpose of this group is to reconnect occasionally, just to talk about our past and share life as it is now. And these people have also been strong supporters of our past brain cancer walks. But my introduction to glio was actually through my friend Trish. And I think that's an amazing way to get introduced to glioblastoma. It was sort of from a distance, but she contracted it in 2003 and passed away in 2004. And so from the sidelines, I watched her and her family. She had 3 young boys and a husband go through the symptoms and treatment. She and I met through a women's Bible study group, and many of us helped her family in different ways. But little did I know it was my training ground for what was to come in our family. So our story involves, like Diane said, my husband was diagnosed at 47 years old in June of 2009 after a weekend of small seizures and lightheadedness. Rod was the kind of guy who filled a room with life through his humor, energy, athleticism, and his large size. He was a coach for many youth sports teams in our community too. He worked out, exercised with great discipline, had a big heart, and was a devoted father with a never give up attitude. Our kids, Tyler, Katie, and Bo, were 12, 15, and 17 at the time of diagnosis. So we had a CT scan, and then things happened fairly quickly. And within 16 days, Rod had 3 brain surgeries. The first was a brain biopsy at our local hospital to confirm he had glioblastoma. The second surgery was 5 days later, a miraculous 3-tumor removal surgery by Dr. Foltz performed at Swedish Hospital in Seattle. His tumors were on the right side in the front, middle, and back of his head. So he was suffering symptoms on the left side. But the third surgery was the most difficult 11 days later when a major wound infection developed, and it required a portion of his skull to be removed which now required that he wear a helmet whenever he walked or was transported anywhere. That was very humbling for my husband. So there was where our abnormal life began, and my husband's diagnosis rocked our world, broke our hearts, and definitely broke our pride. So we were indeed humbled and found ourselves in great need. The year ahead was filled with peaks and valleys of various kinds. But during that year, we all learned a lot about life, love, and the power of faith. So the treatment itself, like I said, we were happy to have Dr. Foltz as our neurosurgeon and head of our medical team. It brought us a lot of comfort to be at an advanced brain tumor center. So I always encourage people to seek help at a place like that. Since it was 100 miles away, we spent a lot of time on the road, but ended up having radiation in Bellingham, thankfully, because it was just a few minutes from home. But after this third surgery, Rod came home on IV therapy for the infection. And then later, after that was completed, we had the usual radiation and oral chemo, Temodar, which began. And after a few months of that, we added in Avastin infusions. So I'd like to say a word about clinical trials here. Because early in our journey, we were open to going on to a trial, but only if Rod felt comfortable with it and could feel hopeful that the benefits outweighed the cost. But we didn't have much choice because no trials were available to him during that time. I think he just missed a window. A few years later, I learned from another caregiver about how her husband became severely ill after being on a trial. That trial was discontinued, but it left a bad taste in my mouth about trials in general. So you could say I was not exactly what you call a trial supporter at that time. But over the years and watching the people go through our local brain tumor support group, I have witnessed some of our members who participated in trials that have definitely outlived their life expectancy and with good quality of life. So my attitude has flipped around now over the years, and I wish there were more opportunities for trials for two reasons. The first is that trials do offer hope, and we desperately need hope for our loved ones going through this daunting disease, right? At least for an extension of life. And the second reason is because trials could lead us to a cure, and we definitely need hope for a cure. And the only way to get there is through trials. Unfortunately, because of the severity and short-term life expectancy of brain cancer, it is more difficult to set up and implement trials. Next slide is about broad symptoms, which probably are common to many of you, but I'm just going to name off several that we experienced. Not all at once. Some of these were spread out over our year. At the onset, headaches became intense, not right away, but right leading up to the first surgery. Seizures, fatigue, extreme at times fatigue, weakness, imbalance, vision impairment. On the left side, he lost some of his vision. A few hallucinations, disoriented, easily lost in familiar places, even at our home football stadium. After the game, he didn't know how to get back to the car. He had personality and mood swings that could cause him to become depressed or short-tempered. And I think the steroids heightened that and took away his filter. So some of his words became harsher to us, not like his normal self. And there are some funny things that we've actually compared in our group through a brain tumor support group. Some of the normal tendencies he had became exaggerated, such as an excessive desire to buy things. And we sort of laugh about this in our group, although this can be a very serious problem. My husband would see a TV commercial and want to buy 10 pairs of sunglasses because he wanted to share them with all of his friends. And I was in the background going, no, we don't need to spend the money. It could also give excessive sarcasm, and he used sarcasm normally in his humor, but the excessive sarcasm was to a point where it could be hurtful. And then he had heightened fears or paranoia, like not wanting me to leave, or fear over the kids and what they were doing and would it bring them harm, and that type of thing. And of course, there are secondary symptoms, which Can include heartburn, constipation, backaches, other things to deal with. And then next slide is about survival support system. And I love that who you've had on already today, because some of this crosses over with that. We definitely needed a good medical support team around us. And we did have a team of doctors that we could trust, though we had to filter through a few to find the right ones. I think I counted about 8 doctors involved in our case at one time, which is a lot to keep track of. A lot of appointments, a lot of little business cards to know who to contact for what. And then for spiritual support, super important to us because we're a Christian family anyway, but we invited our pastor to come visit our home regularly. And he, from the get-go, the night before the first surgery, he was there with us and comforted me too while I was in the waiting room. We welcomed others to pray for us, and we kept our church updated, and we spent a lot of time praying together in the home and individually, just pouring out our hearts to God. We read great faith-inspired books along with the Bible. Some of them were books for me personally to lift and refresh my spirit. They might be a good novel, or it might be a story, a documentary story about someone else that had been through a really severe journey and survived. Also had devotional books to read to my kids every night, because when Rod was in bed, I would pull them all together. You obviously worry about your kids, right? That could be a whole nother session. But I would bring them together and let them ask questions that were on their minds and try not to give them too much information, but just enough for what they needed. And they were at different ages too. So our devotional books was a neutral way to give them something encouraging. And then I had books that I could read out loud to Rod at night after he went to bed, such as The Purpose-Driven Life, to encourage his heart. And these times became his favorite time of the evening, of the day, actually, and when he seemed to be most at peace. So I'm really thankful for those times. And then for the caregiver, you need physical support too, and physical wellness. I chose to continue to exercise my body, whether it was small amounts or a walk or whatever. It's not that I ever wanted to exercise. I already had an exercise regime, so that helped because I was already in the habit. But I felt so much better after I exercised and never regretted a workout or a walk. Taking care of my body physically helped me in other areas too, like emotional and mental well-being. I tried to take time to eat healthy foods, and I was cooking a lot for the family, so that was not too difficult. It's just trying to avoid eating out all the time is hard. And then trying to drink lots of water. I can't say that enough. And I know I didn't do that enough, but I encourage you to do that. I took no guilt naps whenever I could, because caregivers need rest. And if you're not sleeping well at night, give yourself permission to take a nap. And then for social and emotional support, I leaned on family and friends around us. We've talked about that, how important that is today. And I kept them updated through a private email group, our main family and friends. So I didn't have to answer those 17 phone call messages I had at the end of the day. I didn't know about Caring Bridge back then, and I wish I had, because I would have used it. I scheduled times for family and friends to visit, and I was the gatekeeper of the home and the schedule. So I sort of had control over that. And sometimes I had to say no to somebody at the door. It just was not good timing for a visit. I suggest keeping your visits from outsiders down to a minimum of 15 minutes, maybe half hour. But if it was beyond that, Rod would get extremely exhausted, but he wouldn't say anything and suffered for it afterwards. I accepted meals and offers to help from a variety of people in a variety of ways, from yard work to runs to Costco, to carpooling my kids to practice and games. And I had that, what I heard earlier was those 3 people. I knew who to call in an emergency. And those are crucial people that you can trust and count on. So I do encourage you to have that list. I also journaled nearly every day to let out my thoughts and my grief. Plus, bonus, Bellingham, I had met, and she was willing to talk with me one-on-one. She was key in answering some of my hardest questions. And eventually we called in hospice, and they were our support for me, as well as Rod, our final few weeks of his life. Rod passed away in June of 2010, almost exactly 1 year from diagnosis, at the end of our oldest son, Bo's high school graduation weekend. But he made it. He made it to graduation. He didn't make it to graduation, but he made it through that graduation day. So lastly, some lessons learned from all of this. And you will have takeaways. You may not be able to know what they are right now if you're in the middle of your journey, but you'll look back someday and realize how much you learned. And I heard this today also. When you love someone enough to commit to being their caregiver, it will require sacrifice, but love is worth it. You and your family can grow stronger because of this experience in a myriad of ways. So believe and keep your hope alive, regardless of the outcome. Also, let go of what is outside of your control and set your mind and energy on the things that you can do for your loved one. Accept help. We've heard that today too already. Don't try to do everything yourself. One of the hardest things I had to do was let go of having a friend give my daughter her sweet 16 birthday party, only 6 days prior to her daddy's death. And also, don't give up on God or your faith when life gets hard. Instead, lean into it. My heart was so weary, but when I leaned into my faith, trusting God instead of fighting him, I learned I didn't have to know it all or do it all, and he filled in the gap. And then eventually, you can turn this experience of adversity around for good. Find ways to share and encourage others who are struggling as caregivers. There's a lot of caregivers out there, right? Listen to their stories of hardship. It will boost and recharge your heart to give back, even if it's just listening, doing something useful with this journey that you're on. And if it's not today, then maybe someday. And lastly, my personal motto as facilitator for a brain tumor support group is 2 words: simply be there. When someone shows up and listens to you, isn't it a treasure? And even though it's hard and sometimes emotional, well, okay, let's get real, a lot of times emotional, you can do the same for others and believe that God and good can come out of it. If you feel like giving up and giving in, I would just say, stay in the ring. And my husband would say, never give up. So there you go.
Thank you, Marianne. Well, I'm proud of you. And I know Rod is too.
Thank you.
I have a question for you.
All right.
How does one take no guilt naps?
I love that question because I have talked to so many people. This isn't just about our brain cancer journey, that feel extremely guilty for giving up that time that they should be doing something else in the middle of the day. But for me, I found that if I can take a nap, and maybe not everybody's body is the same, obviously, if I can lay down for 20 or 30 minutes and relax my mind, and even if I don't get into a deep sleep, but I can relax, and then maybe put my timer on, say, okay, today I allow 30 minutes. And then when the bell rings or I wake up, I get up feeling so much better. It's kind of like the start of the day again. And my energy is reboosted, revitalized. And then I can go on and do the next thing. But usually about 2 o'clock, my energy is waning. And then I'm just going to continually go down. And there's one thing after another to do. Like the list is nonstop for what to do, especially if you're parenting, you got kids schedules, sports schedules. It was chaos. So I just gave myself permission to say, it's okay. Just take 15 minutes, 30 minutes. Maybe I have an hour today and I'll read a little bit in the middle of the day, but it can rejuvenate you and re-energize you.
Really great advice. As caregivers, we all know this. We typically don't take as great of care of ourselves as we do our loved one. And we need to, right? So you talked a little bit about you had to let go of pride, and not only you, excuse me, also likely Rod, likely your family. Do you want to talk about that just a little bit more?
Sure. And I will say, and if he was here today, he would say he was a prideful man. I think, no, I won't make a judgment about men in general. I think we all are prideful. You know, when we are self-sustaining, when we've worked hard to achieve a great career and we're at the, you know, top of our game, we've got a family, a house, and all these wonderful things we've accumulated. And then we get knocked down, like, you know, trauma can happen in a moment, right? Any day, anytime to anyone. So Rod learned the hard way that, you know, as things were taken away from him, and I think having your driver's license was one of the first things that was really hard on his ego. Like, I have to depend on somebody else to drive me everywhere. That just, so he had to get used to those things. And then in that was to me a process of humility and letting go. And I saw him do that. At first, it was just more like an angst and anger. Like, I don't want it. I mean, this isn't fair. You know, all those attitudes that come out of us. And, you know, eventually we needed a handicap sticker. But then we also started looking at other people differently. And we started to realize, wow, what they're going through is what we're going through. But we never really thought about it, you know? So parking in a handicapped spot and then watching other people park and get out with their handicap, you kind of go, oh, I can relate a little bit more now. And I have more empathy for them. So it really served us well. It is a breaking process, but humility is funny because now humility is what I look for when I interview people for a job. Because if they have a prideful heart, it can lead to more argumentative, you know, employees. A humble heart is more accepting of things and willing to work as a team, that they don't know all the answers, they don't have all the answers, but they, you know, are valuable. I love humble hearts. So lesson learned.
I thank you for saying that. There is definitely truth to a lot of times with people who have been through a brain tumor diagnosis, a brain cancer diagnosis, either as the patient or the caregiver. Definitely life is looked at differently. And usually those folks have more compassion for others. They're forever changed,
Right.
forever. And I think that's what you might mean by a humble heart, correct? It's similar. It's similar.
I look at you, Diane, because I mean, obviously you're not sharing your whole story with us today, but the reason the nonprofit started was because of you and Chris's humble hearts. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to work with you on creating, if I could, a playbook for creating what you did with the Bellingham Brain Tumor Support Group and the do you call it the Glee Club, right? GLI?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would like to work with you to create a playbook because I think other people can use that kind of support and they may not have that resource. So they may have the energy to create it themselves, to create more community, not only for themselves, but for others as well. So let's work on that together. I appreciate it so much. You talked about making through this brain cancer journey, making your exercise a priority, correct?
Definitely.
So it's a thing. I do actually, I've thought about this so much. I was training for a half marathon when my husband was diagnosed, and I do believe that all of that prior training gave me more stamina to be able to handle this and have, even though I was exhausted, it also gave me the energy I actually needed to care not only for my husband, but also for our two small children. And I, you know, we all hear how important exercise is, of course, et cetera, et cetera. But there is really something to be said that if you are in an exercise routine and then something like this happens to your loved one, I think you really are better, not only prepared, but I think you said handling the stress, I think, but it's true. exercise really helps. It also helps, I think, on the mental side as well. So thank you so much, Marianne. I really appreciate you sharing, and your lessons learned today were really important to all of us. So thank you. Marianne is open if anyone wants to continue the conversation with her. She is sharing her email address and her cell phone number, and she is available if anyone would like to reach out to her to discuss or talk about anything she's talked about a little more, or other topics as well. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for the privilege.